Brilliant. Microphone's on. Okay, everybody. Welcome. Sorry to interrupt your happy conversations. We've an awful lot to get through today. It's delightful to see so many people in the room. I understand we have an awful lot of people online as well. So it's a really exciting event we've got in front of you. So welcome to the UKRI Connect, Transforming Tomorrow Together. I think of that as the 3 T's. Transforming tomorrow together. Who thought of that, putting that together? So it's a program of activity that actively reaches out across disciplines, across sectors and across regions. And I think one of the real gains of that is it helps to connect the research and innovation system across the whole of the community. So I'm Louise Heathwaite. I'm currently Pro Vice Chancellor for Research and Enterprise at Lancaster. I've been doing that role for 4.5 years. I've been at Lancaster since 2004. I'm about to embark on my 3rd or 4th secondment from the university, and in a month's time I start as Executive Chair for the Natural Environment Research Council within UKRI. Hugely excited about that, but hugely regretful at leaving Lancaster at this critical point in its history. I'm hugely proud, though, in the context of being PVC today, to welcome you to Lancaster. Yesterday, we heard a lot about our work with many others across the region, with whom we're intimately connected in really delivering research with impact. And the whole emphasis of that research is that we deliver something that presents positive outcomes for the communities with whom we want to work. Hugely important to us. And what's hugely important is the way we work together as part of that region. And so I'm hugely proud to welcome you in that context. One of the reasons we push so much in that connectivity and that work is partly a response to a previous visit from the Executive Chair of UKRI, not Ottoline, Sir Mark Walport. And Mark came here, I can't remember how long ago now, but I remember him saying to us, "Where's your industrial hinterland?" And I thought to myself, as did many others, how can we demonstrate that that industrial hinterland is not actually critical to doing fabulous research with impact that is important for communities? And I think what this programme, those of you who were here yesterday and what you'll hear today, is how you can actually do that without necessarily being part of a major industrial hub. And that's why I'm so pleased about this programme, the way it's reaching out in terms of its activity across the space. So today we have the honour of hosting UKRI. I'd like to think that we've got virtually all of the cream of UKRI sat here today, and they're all going to be talking to us. So please do have your questions ready. That's what makes these things successful. If we have really insightful questions that will challenge our panel, who I'm sure will be happy to give you answers. So we start off with 3 presentations from core members of UKRI. And then we move to an expert panel. And I say expert in the sense that that panel is really connected between the research and innovation, the policy and the government. And I think actually exploring some of the issues. Those of you who've been online today will see a huge draft of all sorts of things happening in terms of publications coming into the sphere. We might hear a bit about that from some of the UKRI representatives here today. So I think that working at the interface and exploring some of those issues will be really important. Then after a short break, we move on to really looking at 3 people presenting to us about demonstrating the value of impact in this connected research and innovation system. It's a really tight schedule. I will try and be a good chair and keep you to time, and I'll try and make sure that everybody in the audience gets a chance to ask questions if they can, and that we pick up with some of the online questions. Last bit I've got to finish with before I step down is that really important housekeeping part. So there are no fire alarm tests planned. So if there is an alarm, it'll be real. If the alarm sounds, then you need to exit by the nearest fire exit. And I hope that they're fairly clearly signalled to you over there. If you're desperate to go to the loo, that's out the same way and down the corridor. Perhaps you'll be able to save that to the break and we can keep that going. So without further ado, I'll welcome our first speaker, Dame Ottoline Leyser. Thank you, Ottoline.
Thank you very much indeed, Louise, and thank you everybody for braving the weather to come to this event today. It's a huge pleasure to be here. I really enjoy these events around the country, visiting the extraordinary people who make up the UK's research and innovation system. And it's incredibly valuable to us to listen and understand what the opportunities are that you all have, that you're all striving to deliver, and how we can help. So I really hope to get some of that input as we go through today. I think this is a really, let's do some slides. How's that? The key opportunity for us at UKRI, as the UK's largest public sector funder of research and innovation that spans all sectors and all disciplines, is to work with you, with the whole research and innovation system, to be the smart connector, to do the join up that I think is the only way that a relatively small country like the UK, with a relatively small amount of money to invest in research and innovation, the only way we'll really stay ahead is to work in that really joined up way, so that we can connect up the system to deliver more than the sum of the parts. And UKRI's role in achieving that is key. We are a kind of USP for the UK from that point of view, in how to do research and innovation in that properly aligned way. That approach, that desire to connect up across the research and innovation system, is now much more deeply embedded in the way government thinks about research and innovation, which is potentially just transformational for the UK. We are in the middle of the Department for Science, Innovation and Technology's first birthday party week, which I'm sure you'll have seen lots of press releases and excitement around that, and celebration. This is, if we can properly make it work, an enormous opportunity for a department that is utterly focused on science, innovation and technology, with an explicit remit to join up across government, working in close partnership with a funder through which about 45% of public sector R&D investment flows through our direct allocation from DCIT, but also we're able to deliver across government for other government departments on their key research and innovation priorities. And that ability to coordinate that whole 20 billion R&D investment from the public sector is absolutely critical to achieving the success that we want to achieve. In that context, it's obviously not just the money, it's how you do it. And the other huge step forward in the creation of DCIT is the establishment of the Science and Technology Framework, which sets out the 10 elements that you have to coordinate in order to build the kind of innovation economy that we desperately need. And I think this is it's really important that the Science and Technology Framework really gathers momentum as a way of working across the whole of government, and how we all think about the kind of work that we're doing. It's not the stuff that is going on under the list of the 10 things, although that's obviously very important at any one time. It's a way of thinking about how to deliver successfully for research and innovation. And it's this set of 10 things that has been woven together, that all of those things need to align well as you drive forward any policy on any kind of science and technology type activity in public policy. And if we can really embed this as a way of thinking, I think we can really make the most of the research and innovation system and build the kind of innovation-led economy that we need. That is critical for the future success of the UK. I like to think about this in the context of the three vertices of a triangle. There are high productivity, innovative, high growth businesses that provide those really high quality jobs for people. There are the people themselves, highly skilled, healthy, prospering people. And then, of course, there are our public services, which need to also be high quality, innovative, and through that innovative approach, affordable, really supporting the full range of things that we need in the country. These three things are clearly deeply interconnected. You need the people to work and create and fuel the high productivity, innovative businesses, and of course, the public services, but also the high quality public services support the thriving people, and the businesses add value in our economy and our society in a way that also supports people to thrive. So the other connection across this triangle, of course, is tax. So from the high quality jobs and from the businesses, tax flows to the government, and the government spends the tax on things like the public services. If you view it as just this set of activities, then you can see the quite kind of perilous situation that we're currently in. If you're not generating the funds, the income from the businesses to support the public services, you can get yourself into a debt trap, where the money you're taking out of the public services and the jobs to support out of the businesses and the jobs to support the public services is too high to allow growth in the businesses, and not high enough even to support the high quality public services. And unless we can break that negative spiral, we're going to be in trouble. A key way to do that is to think much more imaginatively about how we invest the tax dollars, rather than simply taking them out of one place and putting them into another place. And there are two critical examples of that, which are clearly highlighted in the Science and Technology Framework. And the first of those is public procurement. Obviously, all of those public services need things, and we need to buy those things from somewhere to support those services. If we buy those things from our high quality, productivity, innovative businesses, then in spending the tax money to support the public services, we also support the businesses. And so getting that public procurement piece right, really critical. And then the other absolutely essential element of this, and I would say that, wouldn't I, is investment in R&D. So if you spend your tax money on research and innovation, then that fuels all three of those corners of the triangle and all three of the connections between them if you do it well. Because the investment in R&D obviously kind of produces the extraordinary ideas that fuel the businesses and the innovation in the public services, but also it supports the people themselves, the extraordinary range of people whom we train by investing in R&D through the public sector, in our amazing universities, not only the researchers and innovators, but all of the people who work with them, project managers and so on and so forth. All of those people are crucial to support the businesses and the public services and the workforce in those places. So really being bold about how we invest tax to drive the positive cycles of this triangle are absolutely crucial. It does take bravery, because if you're asking yourself, should I invest in more nurses or should I invest in R&D, it's very easy to think that nurses are the solution. And indeed, nurses are wonderful. We should definitely invest in nurses. But in the medium term even, our ability to continue to invest in nurses is actually totally dependent on this high productivity and economy. And so we have to be bold in investing in R&D and high quality public procurement in order to allow us, give ourselves the stability of this system into the long run. And again, I view UKRI as absolutely critical in supporting that high quality R&D investment. And of course, and many people will have noticed that this diagram is effectively a diagram of the Science and Technology Framework, and we can't lose sight of the other key elements in the framework, like infrastructure, regulation, strong, stable signalling of what we're trying to do, prioritization where we clearly can't do everything, and really building those international and engagement and driving up the private sector investment through everything that we do. So that's what our strategy aims to deliver. That's how we think about the way we invest in R&D at UKRI, where we're thinking about investment in all of the elements for research and innovation that we need, again, map onto that framework: people and careers, places and infrastructures, innovation, ideas, and bringing all of those things together impacts on the critical things we'd like to see. We have, the way that we think about this is that we have excellence across this whole thing, but across this whole thing, in order to make it work, we need to think about the changes that need to drive into the system, and the principles for change are that we use to steer our decisions. Diversity: have we got the right range of whatever it is across that, all of those axes? Are we funding the right different types of grants? Are we funding in the right different types of place? So on and so forth. None of diversity is no use at all unless you join everything up. So diversity with connectivity, which builds in resilience, and all of that then needs to be anchored in deep engagement with all of our stakeholders, including publics. And underpinning all of this, of course, we need to work better as an organisation. Huge transformation program going on in UKRI at the moment. So please bear with us through this year as we try to re-engineer the organisation to deliver better across a range of approaches, a range of factors, deliver better for you. Our strategy was published coming up to 2 years ago now. We're making tremendous progress in delivering it. This slide just highlights a few of the things that you may have spotted that have happened over the last couple of years. I could highlight things like the cross UKRI response mode scheme, so fully interdisciplinary, anything you like, somewhere to put your idea that you've never known where to put it before because there wasn't a committee labelled your thing. Innovation accelerators, a novel approach to try to drive up innovation in different places. A huge amount of work on understanding what works in research and innovation. You'll have seen the DCIT UKRI collaboration on meta science. This builds on our existing investment in the Innovation and Research Caucus, just picking out a few things more or less at random. And in terms of working better as an organisation, we are rolling out our Simpler Better funding programme, which I'm sure many people in the room have experienced. Again, it's a work in progress. Please bear with us. We're developing it deliberately in a way that allows us to iterate to make sure that we build in your feedback. So please continue to provide that. Lots going on, very exciting. I hope you're enjoying the benefits of these interactions and activities, but please feedback always keen to hear feedback on what's working, what isn't. You can think about our budget divided across the piece in this kind of way. One of the really interesting things about our budget that we are working very hard to do is build better data systems so that we can cut our budget across a whole variety of different axes. It's divided up on this slide in the context of the priorities of our strategy primarily. But you can divide it up in a whole variety of different ways. And one of the things that I've taken to using to describe it, which I think is very informative, is you can more or less think of it in 3 different parts. There is the sort of sector-focused part, which would be Research England, working very closely with the devolved administration equivalents that funds the block grants into universities, and Innovate UK, which is entirely focused on businesses. So that sector-focused part is about 1/3 of our budget. There is then the funds that are fully devolved into research councils to support their disciplines. So that's the core discipline-focused part, and that's another 1/3. And then we now have 1/3 of our budget that is essentially managed collectively by all the executive chairs to build the join up that we need in how we work. And that includes a whole range of interventions. For example, that cross-council interdisciplinary call, but also our strategic themes, focusing on particular priority areas, the way we think about our talent investment, where councils have full control over how much money, for example, goes into PhD programs in their areas, but we think about that and we manage that in a collective way to harmonize the way that we support PhD students and also to build more interdisciplinarity across the PhD landscape. So lots of examples like that. And every executive chair out of the 9 with whom I have the privilege to work has not only the responsibility for their council and therefore their discipline or their domain, but also in supporting that pan-UKRI, cross-UKRI working. So I summarized on this slide. You can think about it in a variety of contexts, how we fund, so things like the meta-science work and the funding service that I've talked about already, trusted research and innovation to ensure we're supporting our research in a way that works with national security. We have those 5 strategic themes I talked about, which are listed out on this slide. We have the 5 critical technologies of the Science and Technology Framework, where we're ensuring we're supporting that work across UKRI. We have key sectors which cut right across the councils that we need to think hard about, the ones we're currently focused on: creative industries, food, space, and the life sciences. And then we have a variety of horizontals, which you're going to hear a little bit about now. So international, people, culture, talent, infrastructure, commercialization, our place work, and public engagement. So all of these things are championed by an executive chair whose role is to coordinate that work across the whole of UKRI. So we are delivering, as I always say, more than the sum of our parts. So all of this, I hope is reflected in how our communities are beginning to experience us and how we work. And as I say, we'll be hearing a little bit from Jessica and Christopher about some of those in a minute. But all of this is also reflected at multi-scales across the country, and very much here in the Northwest, where you can find brilliant examples of all of those kinds of activities and investments on the ground. A few semi-random ones have been pulled out on this slide, and it's been a huge pleasure to meet people in this region, talk about the extraordinary work going on in different areas and sectors, and I'm looking forward to more of that as we go through today. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Ottoline. That was a fabulous introduction to everything we need to know about UKRI in a very short time. So I'm sure the audience and online attendees appreciate that. So let's move to the next talk immediately. We've got Jessica Corner, who is a place champion, who's going to talk to us about place and its importance in UKRI. Over to you, Jessica.
Thank you. And I'd like to also reiterate what Ottoline said, how good it is for us to be here over the 2 days that we're visiting the Northwest. We are learning enormously from you all about the assets here, the ambitions, the opportunities, and the nuances around trying to invest in the way that Ottoline has been speaking that actually does great things in places. So as place champion for UKRI, I'm just going to talk you through what the strategy and initiatives look like as we're currently working on them. This is absolutely about government ambitions for levelling up, which, as you all know, there is a commitment over the spending review period that we're now well into, that domestic public investment in research and development will grow outside of the Greater South East by at least a third. And just to say that that's not all in the hands of UKRI, it's about all of the cross-government investment from all departments, including NIHR, for example, but there are all the others over that time. Also, that translates into an ambition that is a 40% increase by 2030. In terms of the Department for Science, Innovation, Technology, there's been a effort to say, well, what does that actually mean in terms of that part of that commitment? How does that get taken on by the government department that's specifically responsible for investment? And then that's been calculated as a commitment to a 1.3 billion increase in investment over the spending review period. Now, given that UKRI comprises 95% of that budget, there's a great deal that falls to us, something like 1.2 billion of that falls to UKRI to commit to increase in spending. So we're working very hard on this. We're very interested to do that. And we have developed a programme of activity that helps us address delivering on that target. It is quite a challenge for us because actually at the point at which we were starting up this commitment, actually there's quite a lot of already existing commitments already contracted for and already out and in the system. So it's about, you know, how do we drive this harder? How do we think further? So one of the things that we've done in the last year is develop a place funding policy, which states that all funding opportunities, investments should be designed with place considerations in mind, in the expectation also that they will have some kind of a criterion around place added to the way assessments are made for decisions. Now, these need to be particularly designed for any particular programme or initiative. So, but absolutely that has been introduced into all councils, and councils are thinking about precisely how that should work. Also, in terms of the cross UKRI programmes that Ottoline was referring to. We're also trying to think about how best do we work on supporting the delivery of that spend outside the Greater South East. And when we analyse our data, what we find is actually there isn't really a significant difference in success rates for applications across the regions of the country. In fact, actually, London, for example, probably does slightly less well than other parts of the country. What it is, though, there is a difference in the actual number of applications and the value in pounds asked for. So that tells you something about it's not just a matter of trying to change the policy. Actually, there's an issue of capacity and capability, know-how, knowing the opportunities that exist to address. So in order to think about that, we're actually wanting to dial up and integrate and coordinate our communication and engagement activities across the UK in a more active way. And to use strategic intelligence gathering in order to help with that. And of course, an event like this and these 2 days are very much about that communications and engagement, but also to work with all our staff that are involved in engagement activities for different councils to now be more coordinated and more able to think about this. But we're going to need an ongoing conversation about how do we address the issues that we see. And then there's a third area, which is about kind of dedicated strategic investment into initiatives that actually place activity in regions where there is great opportunity. And again, these 2 days have been wonderful for us in terms of having that extended conversation about where those opportunities may lay. And as for the future, we've got great opportunity to think about how best do we take that forward. And we'll be certainly developing a place investment strategy as part of the future for UKRI's thinking going forward. So we have also, as I've just been saying, have a number of programmes that are absolutely place specific in their intention to invest in order to achieve the objectives that we've been talking about. So, for example, the Strength in Places Fund, the Innovation Accelerators Programme in Glasgow City, Greater Manchester and the West Midlands, and in the local policy innovation partnerships, and in the place-based impact acceleration accounts that have been recently awarded, and one that's very active in the Northwest is a very great example of that being lived in action. And so I just thought I would just give you some examples for the Northwest. We've already heard that there is over £1 billion in investment into the Northwest from UKRI, something like nearly 1,400 projects that are live currently. And in 2021, that represented over 7% of UKRI's budget. So there's a lot going on and some very exciting initiatives. The Strength in Places Fund has made a core investment into 2 initiatives in the Northwest, like, for example, the Infection Innovation Consortium in Liverpool, which is developing a leading centre for infectious disease in the Northwest. It's already generated 223 million in additional investment from UKRI, because obviously our objective is to increase the private sector investment into R&D as a specific objective. It's already generated 278 jobs, and there's also other investments that UKRI and others are making that are aligning with that initiative to add value and create that clustering effect that we are all talking about. There's also the Industrial Biotechnology Innovation Cluster Project, supported by 4.9 million investment from EPSRC and through the Place-Based Impact Acceleration Account, which is very exciting. The Advanced Machinery and Productivity Initiative, another Strength in Places investment in Rochdale, which is a 5-year programme with 22.6 million. And over 5 years, this initiative aims to generate an extra 560 local jobs, including a large number of new apprenticeships. It's aiming to increase exports by 130 million and delivering an ongoing programme that will endure into the future. Yesterday, STFC launched its cluster strategy, which you might want to find. We were distributing documents about that, but the investment into Daresbury Laboratory is growing, exciting, important, and very much for this region. And I think it's a kind of watch this space for Daresbury for the future as well. Currently employing 300 staff. Its facilities are used by other scientists across the sector. It's part of the SciTech Daresbury campus and a joint venture company, which is seeking to deliver 10,000 high-value jobs. And then the Innovate UK activity with Greater Manchester Combined Mayoral Authority, where a memorandum of understanding has recently been signed, which seeks to strengthen the collaboration between Innovate UK, UKRI, in order to specifically look at how to strengthen research and innovation clusters for Greater Manchester. And to really push forward accelerating investments into the long term and the way we can jointly work together, which is one of our high priorities to do. So I hope that tells you that we're very committed to this agenda. It's very exciting. It was very exciting to see new investments from Research England into the University of Lancaster through the E3 initiative and the Centre for AI and Maths for the Future. So there are numerous things we could talk about, but thank you, and I hope we'll keep that in our conversation for later. Thanks.
Okay, so we're now on our final of the cream of the creams. We've got Chris Smith. No challenge there, Chris. So you're going to talk, you're the UKRI International Champion, and you're going to talk about international in UKRI. Over to you.
Thank you very much, and it's also a huge pleasure for me to be here, and particularly here this extraordinary investment, intellectual investment, physical investment in design and imagination, which Lancaster has done, which has also actually, I think, shaped the way that we can think about a whole range of issues. For instance, our investment in the Future Observatory for Designing Green Transition, which Lancaster is helping us with, but also public policy through design, which will actually make the differences that will drive some of the things that Ottoline was speaking about earlier. So for me, it's an absolute honor and privilege, pleasure to be here. It's my job to speak as quickly as I can, so we can actually hear from you about our international collaboration and the priorities that we have. Our UKRI strategy committed us to produce an international strategic framework, which would set out the unique role which the UKRI could play in building the strong and varied network of international science and technology partnerships, which we need to deliver on the ambitions of the integrated review and make the UK a global science nation. That framework was published in October 2022, and it describes, in alliance with the UKRI strategy, how we will meet the UK's ambitions for international R&I, working through the strategic objectives and working with you. It reflects the international activity across all of UKRI, the councils and Innovate, and it's intended to last out even beyond the current spending review period into the distant future. We ally ourselves absolutely to the principles of diversity, connectivity, resilience, and engagement that you've seen. And these slides are very dense, but what we're trying to do here is to indicate to you a couple of the ways in which we fund international activity. Importantly, much of this activity is led by you. We are very, very keen to maintain ways in which response mode funding can be internationalized. And for that reason, there are a number of schemes there, particularly co-investigator policies, which I hope will spread across UKRI, various reciprocal agreements, lead agency agreements, and thematic tools, all of which are driven out of your connections and your partnerships, which you are bringing to us. And for me, I think it's extremely important that we allow you to discover the partnerships which will be the strong sector leaders of the future. At the same time, we are also strategically investing using the influence and the priorities which are set by government. So that gives us additional funding, which allows us to run, for instance, the International Science Partnership Fund and the Ayrton Fund, a very large fund dedicated to green energy, which we think is a very, very important step forward for targeted funding. And both ISPF and Ayrton begin to move us into a world where ODA and non-ODA funding are becoming blended as we start to think about a future in which ODA, I hope, will begin to play a larger part in our funding landscape once more. ISPF has recently been augmented with quite significant amounts of additional money. So an initial 190 million was announced for phase 1, and a further 218 million was announced in November 2023 for R&I partnerships with low and middle income countries to support sustainable development. All of this runs alongside the cross-cutting partnerships and multilaterals and bilaterals that we have through our participation at an institutional level in organizations like the Global Research Council and Science Europe, which bring the funding councils together, but also our association with Horizon Europe and the way in which our Brussels office and colleagues can begin to influence that agenda as we move to a future framework are really important parts of this landscape. This is just a slide which gives you some of the indications of why our international collaboration is so absolutely critical for all of us. We know that R&I is just naturally global in nature. Science knows no national boundaries. And you can see that there's a very significant amount of international activity that's going on far above the rather small figure which is on Ottoline's slide. It actually mounts up over years to several £billion. But what that's driving, that small amount of money as a proportion of budget, is actually driving a huge amount of partnerships. So I think it's very important to note that 27% out of 21,000 awards between 2018 and 2022. There are too many 20s in that. 27%, 20-odd thousand awards from 2018 to 2022 had at least one international collaborator. And in total, between 2018 and 2022, we've invested £4.3 billion in international work. So you can see that as you run around this, major infrastructure projects, largely driven by STFC, absolutely fundamental in underpinning work in a whole range of things, from extraordinary large-scale space activity to, classicists speaking here, the unrolling virtually of the Herculaneum scrolls for the first time ever, which means that we will in due course have a massive new glossary of ancient Greek and possibly Latin as well, which will mean that there will be thousands of new classicists who will be needed, hint. Massive benefits for collaboration. Internationally co-authored articles have a much greater reach, and the internationalization of SMEs really driving their higher productivity and growth. And you can see that this runs right the way through our strategies, the government level, but it also supports many of our strategic themes, for instance, building a secure and resilient world, which I have the fortune to lead. And there is just an example, one that we plucked out for BIAS, the Responsible AI for Labour Market Equality in Lancaster University, which has been doing a huge amount of work at doing comparisons between the UK, Canada, and other countries. I think it's a very exciting project. The last thing I would say, and I'll conclude, I'm thrilled that with your support, we managed the transition to Horizon Europe with a guarantee fund, which is now distributed over £1.5 billion. But now it's time to get back into Horizon Europe. I'm sure you're doing that preparation. It is an open door, and we must seize the opportunity to ensure there's strong investment in future programmes.
Thank you. So the exciting bit when you get to ask all your questions, could I invite our panelists to join me on the stage? Thank you very much. And then we'll take some Q&A. I hope we've got enough seats.
Chairs.
So we're connecting them up so they can speak. Thank you very much. Everybody know what they're doing in terms of plugging themselves in? We've got one tangled in all sorts of knots here. This was the test, obviously. Okay, so I won't spend loads of time asking panelists to introduce themselves. There is a list of names on the screen behind, but just very quickly, I'll just go very quickly through those names and they can put their hands up and say, I'm that one. So we've got Ottoline, you know Ottoline, you know Jessica, you know Chris, Steen, Jonathan, Isabel, and Paul. So we have a really excellent panel. I hope you've got some great questions. We have questions coming online as well, but I'll take some from the room first. So who wants to go first? Please say who you are and stand up and speak loudly. There's a question near the back, a face I recognise.
Yeah. Good morning. I'm Manus Hain. I'm Director of Research in the Physics Department. So in your first presentation, you quite rightly emphasised the importance of people and skills. But the reality on the ground in academic departments is we're really struggling to get enough studentships for PhDs. So in physics, we're going to face a situation for the first time that we won't be able to have enough PhD studentships. Every academic has a PhD student. And in fact, the proportion of PhD students that come from UKRI is actually relatively small. Thankfully, the faculty has a 2-for-1 program. So we have quite a few overseas students. When that happens, that brings in money from the faculty to fund the students. So that's my question about the future of PhD student funding.
Okay, what I'll do, I'll take 3 questions in a row, and then you can cogitate who's going to answer those particular ones. So next question, please. Just in front, gentleman in the blue shirt.
Hi there, I'm Matthew Guest from the University of Central Lancashire. My question's around place, as I noticed that you talk about engaging with places with combined mayoral authorities. What about those places that don't have the mayor?
I could have guessed that one was coming. And then right at the very back, we'll take that as the last of the 3 first questions, and you can work out who's going to answer those.
Thanks very much. Ian Darby from the National Nuclear Laboratory. It's also about place. So as the slide had lots of good things on it, but one thing I noticed was missing is researcher mobility. So recruitment and getting people to effectively move around the country. I'd like to hear some creative ideas to be able to solve two-body problems and attract people from their nice, glamorous life in the southeast to the dark and dismal north.
Okay, so talent and place. Who wants to come in first?
I can start quickly on PhD students. So it's we've been doing a lot of work on understanding the PhD student landscape through our new deal for PhD student work. So I think that's we've been thinking very hard about that landscape. That's the first thing to say. The second thing to say is each council is has different approach, a different strategy to the relative balance of PhD student funding versus the funding that goes into their other work. And that's important because that disciplinary sensitivity is critical to that decision. And every council is different. At the same time, we're thinking about how we make our PhD student offer simpler, easier to negotiate, and also to promote that interdisciplinary working that I talked about. In answer to your question in particular, I'm going to lob that over in a minute to Jonathan, where EPSRC, I think, has worked very hard to try to balance that investment into wider things than the students. EPSRC, of all our councils, has a very high proportion of its budget going into PhD students, so that balance is tricky at a time when it has been really important to increase the stipends for our students so that they can afford to live. I mean, it was below the minimum wage effectively for where we're at. So that's also added tension in the number versus quality calculation that we have to do. I will push back because I can't resist it on one thing that you said. The point about PhD students is to provide a fantastic training for those students and to support the all of the many careers into which PhD students need to go. So it is, I'm not interested in whether every academic can have a PhD student. That's not the point. I'm more interested in how we can provide the best possible training environment for PhD students in a variety of different disciplines. That doesn't negate in any way the core element of your question, which is how do we best balance the number of PhD students versus the other things we want to do in the context of wanting to provide a decent stipend for those students. Did you want to come in on something in particular with the...
Well, thank you, Ottoline. So just very briefly to flesh out the picture from an EPSRC point of view, this is a really critical issue for us as a council for the reasons that Ottoline has just elaborated on. We've spent a lot of the last 12 months through Lynn Gladden, Miles Padgett, and now Charlotte Dean as exec chair, really trying to get the best understanding of that portfolio. And this is reflected in our concern for centres for doctoral training, which we've been running as a process over the last 12 months. We have, I hope, ended up in the best possible place with that. The announcements are yet to be made. But there's a sense that we have tried really hard to work with the community and also with all the industry partners who co-invest in those centres for doctoral training. So that's been a real eye-opening experience for us, and I think also in a sense for the community, in terms of the level of investment that is required and the opportunity there. So there's a sense of trying to work in the most efficient way possible. It is right at the core of what we think we are here to provide in terms of training, but I really want to get into some of the detail here. So we've been to many events with business partners, for example, talking about skills needs in their area. And I'd really like to sort of dig into the granularity of that evidence base to say, why for your particular sector do you need skills of a particular kind at a particular level, over what time scale, and how do we tension that against other upskilling activities in the broader landscape? So yes, there's a question of research sustainability, and in physical sciences, we want to sort of see people coming through on those career pathways, but it's that sense of speaking to that broader agenda about how do we do what's best for the UK here. So I think there are great opportunities in this part of the country to have that conversation directly with tier one business partners and to bring them along with us on the journey.
Thank you very much. So
going on a bit long for an
I'm
answer.
just keen to get onto the place part of things as
I'll
well.
be very
but-
quick. AHRC is also much in the eye of the storm on PhD numbers. We're the council that spends the largest proportion of our budget on PhDs, nearly 40%, nearly double anybody else. We are engaged in a rebalancing of our portfolio. We will still be the council that spends the largest proportion of our money on PhDs, and we're really trying to create exactly the kind of balanced environment that Jonathan has been and Ottoline have been talking about, which really respects the skills that are needed from arts and humanities and for our society and economy. It's not an easy balance. It's very uncomfortable for all of us at the moment, but I am absolutely convinced that there was a time for a change and that we can work with the community to end up with a balance which allows us to do the other things that we need to do.
Thank you. So this is a conversation that is going to run and run, importantly. And we heard a lot yesterday about the need for skills and talent. So it won't go away. Keep your questions in mind as conversations you can continue to have with UKRI in the future and in the very short break we've got, but also after the end of this. I'm really keen to pick up on the place questions. I mean, obviously you, Jessica, but other members of the panel might want to pick up on those.
Yeah, and actually there's a thread through to the allocation of the studentships, actually, because I do know that dimension of where, Jonathan, is also a consideration. You know, the best, most innovative programs that are going to suit the agenda that we were just hearing from Ottoline, but also where are they? You know, is a question that's being put. You know, it's very important. But yeah, specifically to the questions about mayoral authorities and not having mayoral authorities, a couple of things to say on that. One is that there is an explicit commitment to listen directly to the Trailblazer devolution deal combined mayoral authorities of Greater Manchester and the West Midlands, and that is actively happening, which is a way of sort of getting those environments to really develop a detailed strategy for research and innovation that they can then bring to UKRI in conversation for us to inform our thinking. That's going on. And those of you who are in geographies that are not too far away from those mayoral authorities, I would suggest you do think of getting close to those conversations, because that's one way of also participating. But yeah, we're very conscious that there are going to be 10 mayoral authorities very soon. So we will need to be doing equal things to listen and encourage that sort of approach. So this is almost like a pilot almost for a future model. And then we're also conscious that there are areas all over the country that won't have those structures. And we need to think about very actively the ways we engage. And again, these sort of events are very helpful in that respect, because we can listen to all parties that are brought to tables in collective conversations. But we're going to be thinking hard about that and not leave out areas that feel unheard. The mobility question, well, yesterday we had a wonderful roundtable on career mobility, porosity across academia and all of the sectors, industry and otherwise, yesterday, about all the things that we need to be doing. It's very active. we were using the National Council for Universities and Businesses report that have recommended a whole suite of actions to address that. And yes, it's very important. We're going to be working. And I think the fact that we're identifying innovation clusters and wanting to work closely with those in order to support them to develop further is a setting where that mobility can be really imaginatively brought out and supported. So it's an exciting agenda and very important. And then of course the design of things like REF are trying to increase the ability for some of the things that have held back mobility to be taken out of the system. But of course it's up to our universities to respond in the way they take that opportunity.
Okay, I will stop the panel now because I'm really keen. I want to hear some more questions from the audience. So I'll take another 3. And if there aren't 3, we'll take one at least from our online audience. So 2 people have got a chance. Chris, over to you. And then one more. Put your hand up soon and I'll pick you out. Go for it.
Thanks very much. Chris Jewell from the Department of Maths and Stats, and very grateful recipient of our recent E3 award, so thank you. I was struck just looking at the various strategies around digital infrastructure and facilities, and just wondered whether there's a strategy or what is the role for software in this, because software is the vehicle that translates, you know, kind of lab bench or whiteboard mathematics into usable solutions for not just the public, but actually other people in within science and research.
Thank you very much. Who else from the room? Over to you.
I'm Elena Semino. I'm in the linguistics department, but I direct the SRC Center for Corpus Approaches to Social Science. My question is about competition in the various processes through which funding is allocated. And I have a little bit of frustration as we've had a center for 10 years here, ESRC Center. We've worked very productively with you all. But every time we go back into a competition, you end up in an all or nothing situation, right? You put in a proposal, if you get through outline, good, you get to full proposal, and either you get the whole thing or you get nothing. And sometimes I wonder whether especially the outline phase of applications could be used in a more collaborative and less competitive way. In other words, I would like a situation where, you know, all the bids go in for outline and somebody at your end who has the full picture might say, actually, out of all of these ideas, what we would like to fund is this combination of things. And actually what might come out of that is not exactly the same configuration that went in. And that might actually pick out more bits of excellence across all the applications than the all or nothing situation that we have now.
Thank you very much. And we've got one online question. Somebody's going to read that out.
Yes,
Sophie, over to you.
So this is from a colleague at NA Research Partnerships, who'd find it useful to understand how peer review is expected to assess the place criteria in funding competitions and what training reviewers and panels will get to support that.
Okay, so some quite interesting questions about how you're going to run things. Who wants to kick off?
I can come in partially on the software one if you wish.
Glad you are, thank you.
So I am the representative in the north. I'm the head of laboratory in Daresbury. And I just want to actually, sorry, before we go into this, I need to correct one of Jessica's slides. Jessica said there are 300 people at Daresbury. Daresbury Laboratory in its pomp back in the 80s employed 650 people. Up until a few weeks ago, that was our record. We're now at 670. So UKRI is continuing to invest in these facilities outside of the Greater Southeast. And Daresbury is continuing to grow. And nearly 300 of the people at Daresbury actually are involved in software, either through our scientific computing department and through our Hartree Centre for National Centre for Digital Innovation. So this is on the one side scientific computing, where we have some of the best coders in the business who are doing the modeling and the simulation around science, feeding into the large-scale facilities that we have and working with the universities.
So Paul, beyond Daresbury, we know you're wonderful. So tell us about the rest. And we've got 1, 2, 3 other people who want to come in.
Do you mind if I just say, it's cool really. So REF 2029, we're looking for unconventional outputs to be assessed in REF. we would love some of those software innovations to
Very good.
be seen by panels and valued as extremely high and important underpinnings for research. So please get ready to
Well,
submit those.
Isabel's desperate to come in as
one
well.
sentence, which is that people in government are very keen on making announcements about big shiny bits of kit, and we are constantly pushing back against that. There is no point in having kit if you don't have software, and there's no point if you having kit and software if you don't have people who know how to operate the kit and the software. So we completely are with you on what you're saying.
So I'll give Chris the last word on the software question.
Invest in creative industries. IT and software is part of the creative industries. It's a key part of the sector. That's where some of the best coding is happening. It's also where some fantastic education in coding is happening right down into school level from the creative industries clusters. Invest in the creative industries.
Okay, so the other questions, there was one on peer review and the other on process, about actually using what comes into you as good ideas in perhaps a more creative way, which I think is an interesting question. Steen, it must be you.
Sure, yes, shall I come in on the process? It's a very good point. And you know, to start with, I just wanted to say how great it was to visit the centre yesterday and to see the fantastic work that's being done on corpus approaches. So thank you. This is a really timely time to talk about this, because clearly when we're looking at major bids, I think there are big questions about these questions of continuity and about how we can be constructive in terms of getting collaboration between different proposers. Obviously, the challenge for us, we don't want to overstep our mark as funders. There's a real risk that we as funders end up trying to direct partnerships that aren't there. But as we think about our funding processes, and the Simpler and Better Funding programme that we talked about is a great opportunity to do that. We are thinking across councils about how we make those specific processes work. This is feedback that we can take on board, and we will need to keep on talking with ESRC Council, with our communities, about how to strike the right balance on that. But we hear you loud and clear that would be a helpful thing to do. So thank you.
Okay, we're running a bit late. Ottoline, I'd love to bring you in now if you want to answer.
Just to add a bit on that, is part of this much broader question of whether we have the right diversity of funding mechanisms. There's lots of emphasis at the moment about how people want longer term funding and more, and as you know, that sounds lovely, but actually creates cliff edges, and it also reduces the amount of money you have for the smaller, shorter pilot type things. And so that balanced portfolio is what we're always aiming for, and innovative ways to kind of average across the portfolio, really good ideas. Thank you.
So I know we're running late, but I don't want this panel off the hook. So if there is a member of the audience who's got a question they'd like to pose now that they hasn't been covered before. Sorry, Sophie's got one, and there is one right at the back.
Cover the training.
Sorry, the peer review.
I mean,
Sorry.
my other
Sorry.
colleagues might.
Yeah.
But what I would say is the conversation around how you create, you know, a place lens into review of in all the different contexts in which review happens is underway in each of the councils to consider how to bring this in. What does it mean for our understanding of excellence in all of those contexts? And so it's a very live conversation. It's informing panel discussions, and I think it's also involving beginning to think about, well, how does that feed through to reviewers?
Thank you, and thanks for being succinct.
Not all of the dimensions, obviously, under consideration.
So there was one question that was going to be different to anything we've heard before, and I think it was somewhere near the back. If you still want to ask it, you've got the floor, and then this is the last one. We'll have to move on.
Thank you, John Leake, Business Growth Director at SciTech Daresbury. I was interested to understand what is UKRI considering in terms of new ideas, new initiatives to further encourage and enable greater investment in innovation from the private sector alongside UKRI's funding.
Okay, in 2 minutes. How about that? Who's going to pick that one up?
Strategy. Thanks for the prompt, John. It's been mentioned a few times. We have launched our cluster strategy, the SDFC cluster strategy, yesterday. There are some hard copies around. I think the place agenda is very important. We need to keep investing in these sorts of things. As you know, John, what we're doing in Daresbury is a public-private joint venture partnership, as it is in Harwell. And we will continue to try and leverage the investment that's going into our science through bringing in industry to work alongside us. We're doing that on an international basis as well. So things like bringing back return from CERN and engaging industry in that. So I think there's a huge breadth of things that we're doing to leverage that private sector investment alongside the sorts of things that are coming from UKRI.
Okay, so hang on, Chris, Ottoline was first and then...
Sorry.
Very good. Yeah, huge interest in this across UKRI and of course across government, particularly in the context of the whole kind of scale-up block that we have in the UK, which includes a major private sector investment block, difficulty in raising those serious kind of late-stage investments from the private sector. Enormous amount of work working with the London Stock Exchange, for example, on the Mansion House reforms and how to unlock capital from the big asset owners. Many things, really close area of focus, and also obviously working with the Office for Investment that is in the Cabinet Office that is trying to attract investment from overseas.
And just a reminder, we're not the only funder. There's an enormous amount of business possibilities through Horizon Europe, Pillar 3, very significant support from UKRI through the national contact points in the UKRO office in Brussels to support businesses and universities to apply for that funding. And really important that we remember Horizon Europe is out there for business as well as it is for the universities.
One very last point, and it's written on your hand, I can see.
Well, no, that's the answer to something else. But from an EPSRC point of view, we've had terrifically exciting proposals through our Prosperity Partnership Scheme. So that's one-to-one matched with industry. That's been wonderful to see. I think there's a real challenge as part of the next phase of UKRI to see how we can link up with Innovate UK better internally. I think that's a really good organizational challenge for us. And then actually, this is not a UKRI problem, this is a UK problem. So this sense of actually engaging, as Ottoline said, with other actors on the stage. So British Business Bank, the LIFTS initiative, there's the update on the Science and Technology Framework that's been published yesterday or today. So there's plenty there about the sort of the grander investment challenge, and it's clear in the R&I interactions that we have that involve, for example, the Department for Energy Security and Net Zero on industrial decarbonisation, that the sums involved in some of these projects are just a couple of zeros more than we have the budget for. So they have to be a truly whole UK project here that involves not just public but private sector investment, and it's our responsibility to de-risk and unlock that investment, but we will do that in collaboration with these other actors.
I like that point about just a couple of zeros.
It's astronomy, right?
Right. We have got a very short period of break of 10 minutes. I don't know quite how we're all going to do a comfort break in that time, but can I ask you to try and stick to that? The panel will be here afterwards. There is some time for asking more questions after the end of the second panel, but I'm keen to hear our next panelists, and I'm sure they've got lots to say to you. So thank you, panel. That was fantastic. Thank you. Okay, everyone. We've been very generous with your 10-minute break. So now I'm going to ask you to sit down, please, and we'll move into the next session. Okay. Thank you. That wonderful silence has descended. So we're on to panel 2, really important panel, and really what our 4 speakers here are going to tell us about is the value and impact of having a diverse and a connected research and innovation system. I've been really bad at holding us to time earlier, so I have told these panelists that I'm going to hold them to time. They've got 5 minutes to speak. And the reason for doing that is I know you're going to have loads and loads of questions to ask them. And I think it's the Q&A where you can really dig in to really finding things out. And the other thing to say at the very end, we've got lunch outside with more opportunity for networking. So you can grab those people who haven't had chance to ask the question of at the end of this session. So without further ado, I'll ask Claire to come and give us 5 minutes on NP11. Over to you, Claire.
Nice to see you all. You know where you see a list of people and everybody else is a professor? You feel slightly nervous, don't you? So there's a quote I like. The only way to discover the limits of the possible is to go beyond them into the impossible. I like that because actually an awful lot of what you're doing and what an awful lot of the organisations that we work with are doing are having to go into the impossible. But where that becomes very difficult is when actually we're putting false criteria and barriers and borders around that, trying to find the impossible. NP11, this is an organisation that really is all about partnership. It is about the business voice, working really closely with NA and the academics. It's very important and really clear and close relationship that we have with the mayors and the non-mayoral regions, which actually I was really conscious of the point that was made at the back in terms of place. You know, this is about making sure that we raise the profile of the North, not as the dismal, dark North, but as that place that we know the North is, which is where there is innovation, creativity, resilience, capability, ability, and huge potential. We have just completed research that demonstrates that there is unleashed potential in the North of around 118 billion. We're not enabling that to be released as much as we possibly can. And that's one of the reasons why I think we are in this room. So I wanted to just talk to you a little bit about the fact that we've just completed some research. So Jen Ray's in the room. We've been working closely with DCIT and also with Cambridge Econometrics in partnership with DCIT on their innovation clusters work and looking across the 11 regions of the North to say, where is that work? Where is the innovation? Where are the elements of creativity moving into commercialization working really effectively? And you've heard from Daresbury and others already today. But that work has highlighted a number of key elements around making sure that our ecosystems are working really effectively. And also, probably just as importantly, where they're not. So I want you to just imagine being somebody that I spoke to yesterday. 28, a scientist, has a fantastic product, has been supported by the NHS, is taking advantage of the change of the way that pharmacies can work, has raised £50,000 so far, has gone out for additional funding, has been working on this product now for 18 months, is no longer paying herself because she is putting in grants and funds. So she's trying to make a decision now about whether she is going out and raising the profile of the company, or is she spending her time filling in forms to get grant funding. She's been doing that. So imagine you've got this dichotomy, this balance between actually getting out there, building relationships with your stakeholders, and filling in forms to actually make sure you can get some funding. On the 7th of November, she put her application in for her Innovate UK funding for 450,000. And yesterday, or 6th of February, at 5:15, which was the date she was expecting to get a decision, she was told there won't be a decision, and I'm not quite sure when you'll get one. What she's had to do today, because I've had a phone call with her this morning, is she has cancelled her supply of her Bluetooth blood pressure monitors because she can't afford to pay for them. And also she's gone to her JVs, who are very keen to invest, to say, I'm sorry, I don't know if I'll have a match. 18 months, she's now living back with her parents, and she's not sure where to go with that business. Pace, decision-making, clarity, transparency actually makes a massive difference. We really need to think very carefully about delaying decision-making. We need to think very carefully about the impact and the consequence of that and what difference that makes. Because what we've done there in not making that decision or delaying that decision is probably about an 18-month, 1 year delay. Because you can't then pick that up. The reason why I give you that example is because those small entrepreneurial businesses are actually the hub of our innovation and what we're able and capable of delivering. It's fantastic hearing what we're hearing from UKRI, and I'm absolutely thrilled that we're able to work very closely. But I'm also very conscious of the fact that we need to make sure that we are listening to what's happening on the ground and making sure that we're supporting those SMEs to be able to deliver. So I think the point that you made earlier about let's be a little bit more creative regarding our funding landscape and how do we make sure that we are thinking very creatively with pace around how we do that is going to be really important. So the research that's been completed on those clusters, and we've got some incredible, I'm going to just read a few of them out, capabilities across the regions is really important. So, glass of water, excuse me. So in essence, we have 11 regions across the north. And what absolutely amazes me every single time I go anywhere is the list of capability that we have. So in Liverpool City region, life sciences, prevention, infectious and tropical diseases was mentioned earlier, incredible capability. Having recently had dengue, I have to say, thank goodness for them. So I have felt it personally, it's been amazing. The Northeast space, Hull and East Yorkshire, net zero, Lancashire, defence and security, Cheshire and Warrington, life sciences, Greater Manchester, artificial intelligence, West Yorkshire, artificial intelligence and health tech, Cumbria, clean energy, Yorkshire and North Yorkshire, bioeconomy, South Yorkshire, metallurgy. Thank you. And also Tees Valley chemicals. It's amazing what we can deliver. But what do we need? Connectivity. We actually have to have fantastic connectivity. Transport infrastructure, connectivity across those intellectual flows, making sure that that works. We need capability, talent access, access to funding. We need to make sure that we have pace and decision-making around that. Collaboration with UKRI is absolutely critical. Academia, business, and competition. It's really important that we understand how best to use that competition. Whether it's confident and bold and appropriate for those people. And I do think it's absolutely critical that those four things work particularly well. So we have collaboration, capability, collaboration, and competition. So a lot going on, it's really important that we focus on raising the profile of the North, getting our trade and investment right, and also ensuring that we raise that very positive profile of the North. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Claire. And I think you gave us 4 C's there. So I think we'll try and focus on some of those later on. So Andy, do you want to step up and give us your piece? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm not a professor, nor do I have an MBE to my name. So thank you very much for inviting me to come and talk about our experience of raising and managing, deploying what we think is the UK's biggest single technology-focused seed fund. So my Northern credentials are a little bit thin, but I did start my career as an industrial chemist down the road in Runcorn, which were my formative years. So I hope that makes you feel slightly better about my accent. I'm going to tell you about the UK Innovation and Science Seed Fund, which is the biggest fund that we manage. It's now a £102 million fund, and UKRI is the single biggest investor in that fund. But I also want to shout out to all of our other partners, which you can see on the left, and particularly DSDL. I know Alan's in the room, so thank you, Alan, for being a founding partner in the fund as well. But look at all that diversity and connection on the left-hand side. It really is a privilege to be working with all of those bodies. So the role of the fund is to be a bridge between the fantastic publicly funded research and the private capital which is needed to scale that out into products and services. And we're the bit in the middle, the first bit of private capital, but because I work for a private company, I should say, so it's part private, part public. It means that we take the first risk in taking the lead, writing the first check, backing big, ambitious ideas, but in companies that have no product, no service, and for the most part, no employees either. So it's our job to provide not only money, but also support and connections. So diversity is at the heart of every venture capital fund. It's a key part of the model, of course, but I think it's particularly true for our fund. So we have backed over 90 companies and projects. Since 2021, we have been in the top 10% of regional diverse investors. So we invest across the whole of the UK. Our investment of, I've tried not to have too many figures in my slides because you've seen quite a lot of figures already. Our investment of 30 million to date has helped our portfolio companies raise over 900 million pounds from other, for the vast part, private investors. And we've helped them spend over half of that 900 million on more research and development. We've helped them hire over 1,000 people. We've worked across publicly funded laboratories like Daresbury, campuses, Harwell, Babraham, universities, catapult centres, and in specific sectors like engineering, biology, fusion, and defence. We've learnt a lot from the many collaborators and founders over the years. Just try and do my job and mention 2 themes today: collaboration and resilience. Collaboration is the heart of everything the fund has achieved. So I work for a private company, Future Planet Capital, but it's been an absolute privilege to work with those UKRI professionals and other public sector professionals with the passion and the vision to build something which, at least at the beginning, was very new and very risky. We have a big advisory board, and something like 60 people have passed through that board, but the culture and the commitment to the mission have stayed the same. And of course, we collaborate with other parts of the ecosystem, the other parts of UKRI. I particularly want to single out the Investor Partnership Programme, which we piloted with Innovate UK 6 years ago, and that's gone on to be another vital part of the ecosystem. And the second point I wanted to make was about resilience. Like any startup that we back, we've had to embrace risk, and when you back risky companies, you have to accept failures, and that's about resilience. And so it's really, I think, to UKRI and our other partners' credit that we've been able to align on the fund objectives, what we want to achieve. We've worked together on the strategy, but as the fund manager, we've been given the freedom to take the risks and to back our own judgment without too many rules, if I can be honest. One of my colleagues always tells our founders that we'll be disappointed if the technology doesn't work, but be really cross if there's no demand for that technology as a product or service. We feel that we have then failed our part of the job if there's no market. Am I doing all right for time? 1 minute. Everybody always wants to hear about venture capital's portfolio companies. Tropic is one of our amazing companies. James, I would talk about Holofirm, but it's not in our portfolio, I'm afraid. It's not a spin out. It's a company based in Norwich. It was founded by a CEO from Israel who'd worked in the US, could have put the company anywhere, wanted the best place to build a company, engineering tropical crops for yield and trait enhancement. And he chose to do it in Norwich because of the great access to talent and facilities at the John Innes Centre. That company's now raised over £60 million from some of the best investors across the globe. And they have real momentum, which my data science colleague tells me is one of the real indicators for success. So thanks for your patience. The journey from £4 million fund to £102 million fund has taken some time, but it's also been a lot of fun. And I want to thank all of the people who've helped along the way.
Thanks, Andy. That was fantastic. You stuck to time. So, Stu, over to you.
Thank you, Louise. Good morning, everyone. So I'm Stuart Wainwright. I'm the relatively new Chief Exec of the UK Centre for Ecology and Hydrology. And I'm going to talk through two examples that I think really show for me how connectivity and diversity are really important for using science to tackle the biggest issues that we face. First, the pandemic, and then climate change. So I've only taken up my role in UKCH 6 months ago. Prior to that, I worked in government for 20 years. And in my last job, I was director of the Government Office for Science. So that's a position in government it's there to basically pull on science from academia, from industry, from the public sector, to deliver science advice on the biggest issues to number 10, to Treasury, to Cabinet Office. Fortunately or unfortunately, I was there during the pandemic. Actually joined 2 weeks before it started, which was spectacularly bad timing, possibly. And just a few reflections on why connectivity and diversity was so important in that. And we all lived through the pandemic. We know what happened. So I was involved with 3 things that drew on science from across sectors to help us get through that. First of all, the running of SAGE and all the other advisory committees, NERVTAG, SPIAM, that you all remember. And that drew on academic science, industrial science, government science, working together to provide that very fast, rapid advice to government. Secondly, we relied on very rapid research being undertaken, funded by UKRI, which is wonderful, to answer a lot of the questions that we just needed to get our head around. How does the virus move? How does it operate in the built environment? What kind of safe distancing should we be aiming for? So really rapid work across sectors to get that right. And then the third thing that happened, of course, was the development of the vaccine. Again, connectivity across sectors, public sector, private sector, academia, working together to produce a vaccine on speed we'd never seen before. So 3 kind of real legacy points for me came out of that example. The first, if you work across sectors with that joined up connectivity, you can make a real difference, save lives, save the economy. Secondly, if you get it right, you can have enduring partnerships across those sectors. And thirdly, the impact on individuals involved in that is huge. So there's a lot of interchange between industry, government, academia in those days in the pandemic, which turbocharged a lot of people's careers, who then took it off into different places, grew from those experiences, and ultimately made even more connectivity. To come to my second example, climate change. I joined the UK Centre for Ecology and Hydrology just 6 months ago. And what brought me there was because I want to do something about the environmental challenges we're all facing. Now, we're an organisation of 700 staff doing very applied science. We've got 100 based here in Lancaster, staff in Scotland, in Wales, and the south of England as well. But to do what we do relies hugely on connectivity again. Essentially, we are a place-based organisation. We do research and monitoring in rivers and lakes and fields and mountains. We are tied to place, but we have to work with others to tackle the challenges that we're facing. Academia, of course, is crucially important. One of our main purposes is to be a foundation stone for UK academia, help environmental sciences in the UK be even better, help them achieve even more. They use our infrastructure, they use our expertise to help them do that. But we need to do even more given the scale of the environmental challenges we're facing. But there's also the private sector and NGOs and government. That connectivity across them all really matters. I'll just give one example of something we're involved in at the moment. Might not sound very exciting at first, but it'll get more exciting as I talk about it, which is salt marshes. So a hugely depleted landscape, really important landscape for carbon sequestration and biodiversity. So we're involved heavily with a consortium of academics from multiple universities, financiers, government, landowners, to look at how we can really try and regenerate these landscapes, get money crowded in from investors, but ultimately make a real difference to climate change and biodiversity and food production and water management and flooding. And it's really damn exciting, getting all those elements coming together. So again, the chance to work across sectors to deliver real value, drive real partnerships, but also open up opportunities for people. One of the biggest advantages we've had of being based here in Lancaster has been the relationship with the university. So given the way the world has gone over the last few years in the development of data sciences, one of our biggest growth areas is the data sciences. And our team in Lancaster has grown hugely because of our relationship with the university. We are benefiting from having a constant flow of wonderful new young data scientists into our organization. The university is benefiting from a chance for some of their people to come and do something that's more applied and get involved with even more partners. So a really wonderful relationship. So I hope those two examples are of some use and some interest. Connectivity and diversity and what UKRI are trying to do to make that work even more is crucially important. Thank you.
Thanks, Stu. That was really excellent. So we're on to our last of the speakers in this panel. So over to you, James. Take us through it. Thank you.
I'm going to give you my back, so I apologise for you.
Oh, you're going to dance at the front, are you? Fantastic.
I don't like being behind the lectern. Yeah, so I'm James. I'm an academic in chemical engineering at the University of Manchester, and I'm the co-founder of a company called Hollyfirm. And that's really what I'm going to talk about today. I've got a few minutes, so I'm going to talk about briefly where Hollyfirm is now, and then rewind back to 2018, where it's Ben Dolman, one of my PhD students, and we've got what we think is an exciting technology that works in our lab. How did we get from there with the support of this interconnected funding ecosystem that UKRI provides to get from the lab to the business that we now have? So Hollyfirm is, well, how do we think of ourselves? We're a purpose-led company, and our real ambition is to completely disrupt the surfactant market so that we can move from fossil-derived ingredients for personal care, household cleaning, laundry care products, and move to bio-based alternatives. So Hollyfirm, we produce things called biosurfactants. We take renewable feedstocks, we ferment them, and we produce a biodegradable alternative to petrochemical surfactants. And these are the molecules that give that cleaning action in all of those application areas I've just mentioned to you. At the moment, Hollyfirm, we employ 49 people spread over 2 sites. Our kind of R&D and offices are in Trafford Park in Manchester. For those of you familiar, we're next door to Inflator Nation, so people who've got kids always know where that is. And then our manufacturing site is in Birkenhead on the Wirral. We currently have a kiloton annual manufacturing capacity, and at the back end of last year, we closed a Series B VC funding round, and that's going to take us from a kiloton to 15 kilotons. So real, genuine, large-scale manufacture. So that's where we are. Rewind to 2018, like I said, how did we get there? So Ben and I are in the lab. Ben was actually my first PhD student. We'd been working on this process technology to separate the biosurfactants as we make them, and then we've got some know-how around how you operate the process. And as an academic, I'm really struggling not to tell you more about the technical details, but you'll be glad I'm not going to. So we've got this neat idea. The challenge is, so we think of it in terms of technology readiness levels. At what scale, where and how have you demonstrated that your technology works? And of course, we can't forget the market either, although perhaps that wasn't something we were quite thinking about in detail yet. So early on, BBSRC, EPSRC fund these things called NIBs, Networks in Industrial Biotechnology and Bioenergy. We got 2 little bits of money out of a couple of different NIBs. The first bit was a business interaction voucher. So that allowed us to go to a local company, take our separation technology and know-how and actually scale up. So go from kind of lab scale like this to something that was a few tens of liters. So we're then proving that our technology can work, not just in our lab, in whatever special kind of environment and little things that, you know, are dependent on where we are, to working with the company, starting to demonstrate some interest. So with these little business interaction vouchers, the company has to put in a little bit of, not just in kind, but cash support. Very small, but you're starting to actually show that people will give us some money because they're interested in our idea. And that's really important later on when you're trying to get buy-in from other people who might give you, well, to be blunt, more money. So we did this little business interaction voucher that was very successful technically, helped to start developing this relationship with the company. And you start noticing, oh, if these people are interested, then maybe we should be interested too. We then moved on and got a kind of slightly larger off the back of that proof of concept award. So that allowed us to start working with people more internationally, actually. So working with a company called Peel Pioneers, who get useful fermentation feedstocks and a citrus waste processor based in the Netherlands. And I'll come back to them if I remember and have time in a moment. So again, this was about taking our technology out, looking at different aspects and developing it further. Ben at this point was visiting some collaborators in India and in Japan. So Ben's a PhD student now CEO. And then from there, you're starting to get a bit of traction, you're getting enough information, you've demonstrated your technology works, that we started thinking about, well, how can we actually get some funding and actually start the process of spinning out Holifirm. So with that in mind, we actually went through the iCure program, which was really great in terms of giving us some time to think about the market, who's actually interested in what we've got to provide. And then from there, that allowed us then to get into Innovate UK funding, which allowed us to establish pilot scale production and then carry on working with things like EU Stars, going back to Peel Pioneers, where that's Innovate UK funding, but to work collaboratively with a partner. So this whole kind of ecosystem of funding allowed us to validate our technology, allowed us to really start understanding where the market is, and ultimately helped us attract our first seed investment from ICOS Capital, and then follow-on funding from Rhapsody Venture Partners, a Boston US-based VC, and Clean Growth Fund as well. So that's almost kind of takes us to where we are now and back to the current day. Very, very kind of brief overview, but thank you for listening to me.
Okay, thank you to all our panelists for staying to time. I'm always worried when someone walks along the stage, they might walk off it, either out or fall off it. So thank you for staying on the stage. Right, we've now got time for our panel discussion. I hope you've got lots of exciting questions for the panel. Ottoline is here joining the panel as well. So it's over to you. And I guess we have questions from online as well. Okay. So I'll throw it open to the room first. Who wants to ask the first question? I'll do it in batches of 3 like I did last time. Don't be shy. Right at the back.
Sorry, me again. Ian Darby from NNL. So there's really lots of great stuff in Innovate UK and KTAPs and all things going on, but can I draw you out on what you think the challenges are around the full economic costing model? This is a challenge for businesses when they're doing the business justifications to be able to have the funding at the beginning before they even go through a process of applying for the grant, and whether or not that thing that was accidental, where actually we never really intended full economic costing to require the 20%. I know it will be an affordability question, but this issue of affecting the risk appetite for people being able to take the chance in the first year of a grant and working with somebody, and if there's any creative ideas in changing the scales.
Okay, thank you. I'll take another couple of questions and then I'll throw it to the panel. Chris?
Thanks. I just wanted to ask a question around the role of venture capitalists really in doing that sort of translational science, because we had quite a good debate about this at the Daresbury Data Conference a couple of weeks ago, about sort of the risks. And so I'm just interested to know the thoughts from UKRI on where the VCs kind of fit into this translational landscape.
Thank you. Any other questions? I'm looking at the same people asking questions. There's lots of you in the room. There must be someone else to come in after this one.
Matthew Guest again from the University of Central Lancashire. I was wondering where the panel see something like the role of ARIA in this mix as the sort of the newer funder, and where that might come in.
Okay, I've got time for one more new person. Is it too close to lunch? New person at the back, thank you very much.
Thank you. Mandy Dixon from the Northern Health Science Alliance. Claire, I was interested in your comments about the unleashed potential, billions of pounds in the north. And we've produced a report with NP11 called about the Northern Supercluster in Health and Life Sciences, and outlined the areas of that potential investment in the north. So I suppose it's a comment and also a question around, how do we move from identifying those areas and to actually getting funding at a broad regional level? So to avoid some of that competition across universities and organizations. And so how do we bring them together? And clearly connectivity is an important part of UKRI's strategy. So I suppose what is the vehicle for funding some of that connectivity to do a lot of the development work? Because I think particularly in the north, there's a real need for that development work to bring people together and get them to the state where they're ready to apply for large sums. We heard that the north is perhaps not applying for large enough sums of funding. So those are all my comments. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And I'm keen that it isn't Ottoline who gets all the questions in a sense, but we have, and we've got some expert panelists here who can also answer some of the points about funding, some of the points about how we develop potential, but also that quite interesting one about the role of ARIA and initiatives like this to sort of think out the box. So who wants to start?
I'm happy to come in.
So which part are you going to cover?
Well, there's a few on finance.
Okay.
So if I try and pull those together, and the role of the VCs, which I think is really critical. So over the last few months, we've had the opportunity to work with quite a lot of stakeholders, and there were three core areas that came out about how do we unleash the potential. One was around actually making sure that we raise the global profile of the north, so that we are actually getting out there and being optimistic about the assets that we have. And I'm not sure we do that as well and as effectively as we can. The second piece was how do we make it easier to invest in the north, both at the FDI and domestic investment. So when you look at the landscape across the north, we make it pretty complicated. And how do we simplify that to make sure that we're raising that profile? And then also when you're looking at the VC landscape, just going back to the story that was just being told, which is actually really exciting, is when you listen to, I'll give you an example of Audley Park Life Sciences Funds. What's really important there, we work with Greater Manchester, Cheshire and Bruntwood to launch the Life Sciences Fund. But what's critical about some of those elements is when we're doing that into the VC landscape is consistency. Because quite often what you want when you're going and you're scaling up is being able to go to the same funder and to make sure that you're building that reputation to be able to deliver. And so that piece regarding, I think actually, Ottoline, you mentioned that cliff edge, and I think you're absolutely right. We need to help organisations, small and large, to actually manage that VC landscape and help them actually make that a much easier process. The other issue we've got is diversity on that, and that's a massive issue. £1 penny out of every pound goes to female-led businesses, and that is something that we actually need to also be thinking quite carefully about.
Thank you. Ottoline, do you want to come in?
I can come in on any one of those things being most useful. ARIA, we work very closely with ARIA to make sure that we're making the most of the fact that they're there and they're new and they're different. They are working on a very specific funding model, which is organized around program managers, modeled on the DARPA, ARPA model from years ago. And it involves really empowering a program manager to drive forward a particular program. And you'll see on their website, they're beginning to identify the opportunities that they want to fund. And they're interested in these kind of potential to invest in things that might completely transform a thing. And obviously, it's a relatively small sum of money, and there are a relatively small group of people who have picked a very small group of things in which to invest. And that's correct. That's how you need to think about that kind of model, because it's never going to be, it can't support the whole system in that way. So although it's very exciting, I don't think it's going to fix any of the problems that anybody was talking about in the room, really. It's going to add an extraordinary additional dimension to what we are doing already in a way that allows us to be sure that we are reaching for the impossible, as you were saying. So very exciting, but not a solution, I would say, and an exciting addition. I guess I would summarize a lot of the other things in the context of this diversity in funding types that we need to try to maintain. Fundamentally, there is a pot of public money that we wish to allocate in the best possible way to support all of those pillars of the research and innovation system that we talked about. People and places and infrastructures and ideas and so on and so forth. There is never enough money. There are always more of those things than we want. So how we manage to allocate the funding in a way that gives opportunities for everybody to bid in, but doesn't create success rates, for example, that are so small that huge amounts of effort go in to funding that will never, winning funding that will never emerge. And it's a real tension, particularly for SMEs. There are millions of SMEs. We can't possibly fund all of them. So how do we support the kinds of schemes that fund in the best possible way in terms of the investment of effort, the speed with which decisions can be made, but doesn't then create a feeling of exclusion of the vast majority of them. And it's a really hard challenge. If anybody has good ideas, I'd be delighted to hear them.
I'm actually going to ask the rest of our panel if they've got an answer or any suggestions about this never enough money point, because I think all of you illustrated ways around it one way or another. So perhaps give us a bit more insight into your wisdom here. Stuart.
Yeah, I'll try and answer that and also pick up that one and also the one about VCs as well, which I hope will answer. I'll start with the VCs one first. So this is all public. So we and a number of other universities and environmental institutes entered into an arrangement with a venture capital firm called Greensmith just before Christmas. It's all new, but gosh, we're feeling it already. And look, there's big prizes.
The pain or the gain?
Sorry?
The pain or the gain?
The gain so far. I mean, there's big prizes to be had, but I'll talk about a relatively niche one, which I hope might bring it to life. So we've developed, to do good science, these artificial intelligence solar-powered moth traps, right? Why moths? Moths are a great indicator of biodiversity, right? What these things do, you put them in the field, they run themselves. Overnight, it will assess all the moths, and through AI, it will tell you what species are there, and you can assess biodiversity. The demand for them is shooting through the roof. From other institutes, from farmers who are so minded, and we're struggling to cope. But our VC partners saying, all right, well, we can help with that. And the demand is not just landowners and farmers, it's other nations, gardeners, right? So huge opportunities here to have a real impact on the basis of our quite basic research. So I see them adding real value there. And that's a way that they bring in money that we just can't access on our own, which is partly the fill in the gap point. The point about FEC, it's a hard one, right? It's a damn hard one. And I always feel for UKRI. I used to work in government. There's only so much money to go around, and so you've got to make it work as best you can. But the folks in UKRI rightly, they point to their wonderful strategy at the start. And they pointed to the science and tech framework produced a year ago, which is also a great document. And at heart, what those things are trying to say is we need to use science to, well, do great science, to do good, to help public services and help grow the economy. And I guess the question I'm trying to think through is the approach to like FEC at the moment, does that really help us achieve those objectives? But I think that's for the likes of Treasury and others to think about as well.
Anything you want to come in on? Otherwise, I'll move on to some more questions.
I feel I should say something, having
Okay.
come all of this way, but I'll be quick. To pick up your point about VCs and at the early stage, anything you can do to take risk out is a positive thing. So there's team risk, financing risk, technology risk. So if you can, to Ottoline's point, make the money go further by upskilling the team, incubators, accelerators, you make the money go further. You don't have to hire an all-star team, and you can compress their learning, and time is money. And then on the technology risk, if you can use non-dilutive financing, investor partnerships or biomedical catalyst, that makes the VC's money go further, and that's also a good thing.
Thank you. Quick point.
Very final quick point on VCs. We've been talking about it in terms of the money you get, but I would also say that it's the expertise you get. These are people who are going to invest. There's literal buy-in. They're going to sit on your board. So the expertise, the knowledge that they bring in terms of the commercial segment that you're working in, and even the expertise that they can bring in through their networks and contacts around some of the technical things you're trying to do, as well as being really invaluable, at least in my experience with Holly Firm.
It's a great panel to be on where people say nice things about VCs. If you want me to come back, I'll come back.
Do you mean that's not normal? Right, okay. We have a question that's coming from online, and then if anyone's got a final question from the floor, I'll take that one. I know I'm holding you between your lunch and the final questions and the response. So over to you.
There's a couple of questions.
Couple of
Can I ask two
questions
together? So the first is asking, if demand is more important than whether it works, how do researchers target demand better and better work with business? And then the second question is, what role do universities play in developing and supporting high-risk innovative projects in their early stages? And what framework should we as a sector be following to do that effectively?
Okay, who wants to take that? Andy?
Demand, that you got to go and talk to customers, and you got to listen to customers. You got to ask people, what is the problems you have? Not tell them, I've got this hammer. Have you got any nails? It feels kind of blindingly obvious, but I think not talking to people who might have problems is the biggest gap. If you're an academic and you'll have some technology you think might be useful.
Okay, Stuart, want to come in then, Claire?
Come on the demand point as well. So I joined my organisation 6 months ago, and the demand for what we do is sky high, and we're struggling to cope. When I came in, I saw our 500 scientists running around trying to chase everything, and that's not the right answer. When you've got to prioritise, what do we most want to do great science, have an impact? But also, this is the connectivity point. Again, you've got to work with others. You know, you've got to spread that. If there is increased demand in a particular sector of science, in our case, you've got to work with other institutions, universities, to be able to work collectively, figure out how you're going to meet that demand. You can't do it on your own.
Claire, you wanted to come in?
I think that connectivity point is critical, but also that making sure that we're focused on the impact and the need, and actually translating what that research can do for the output, the outcome, the customer. We need right now to make such a massive shift in some of you talked about climate tech. We've got some of the opportunity that we have is around that climate tech. And we can deliver on that. And at the moment, we have a global opportunity. We know that there is demand and we know that there is need, but actually unleashing some of that regarding removing some of the regulation or changing some of the regulatory barriers, I think is really important. Enabling the financial landscape to be less piecemeal is pretty critical. And working so closely with the research and the universities and also with people like UKRI is critical, but not constraining that too much, because going back to that possible and the impossible, sometimes we do need to keep on pushing those boundaries. So I think it was something that Ottoline mentioned earlier, is or Jessica, I think it was about being very bold. And as the UK and certainly across the north right now, I think we do need to be pushing those boundaries and being very bold and taking some risks, but we need to take them together in an educated and evidence-based fashion. And that's where I think we can work very closely with academia and UKRI to make sure we've got the evidence and the data so that we can be bold and confident, so that we can deliver and actually create demand. Because actually we need to be creating demand around some of our, for example, green tech.
Thank you. Anybody else from the panel want to come in? Otherwise, I'll just throw it back out to the floor for some more. Last two questions. I hope there are two
Did you
from the
address
floor.
the second question at all? I can't really remember what it was.
I think they were sort of related, so hopefully they were covered. Yeah, okay. Right, thank you. We have a question at the front. Over to you. And one more person, please think about who's going to compete for this last question.
Thank you. Alan Cross from STFC. At Daresbury, I look after the Northwest Space Cluster. Productivity is a challenge in the UK. It's certainly an issue in the north of England. We'll put you on the spot now. What's the one thing you'd do to try and improve our productivity?
Right, you've got 30 seconds to think about that before the last question. Who would like to have the last question? Somebody who hasn't asked the question before. Brilliant, Steve.
Thanks very much. Steve Bennett from an annual science conference called The Business of Science. It's a specific question for James, actually. If you look back from 2018 to now, what's the key piece of advice that you would give to anybody in the room who's going to try and go through the same journey?
Thank you. Right, let's start with you, and then we'll go out to the other challenging question about productivity.
Yeah, I'm always wary of dispensing advice, but I think that obviously what I've presented in the few minutes was post-rationalized to a degree, all true, but I'm giving that picture of it. In terms of the challenges, so I think it's first of all what you think you're going to do and what you end up doing will be very different. So be prepared to pivot, and we've done more than our fair share of pivoting around, and then also people. So I spoke about how many, we've got 49 people in Hollyfirm, but actually very early on, bringing in the right people and how you decide who the right people are has been critical. So I'm an academic, I'm not commercially minded. I've picked things up along the way. But as an example, very early on, we brought in a very experienced person from the chemical sector. They'd had experience at kind of scaling up to where we want to get to. And they've basically done that. They've got that knowledge, and bringing in that kind of commercial mindset to drive things forward was key. So people.
Okay, so you've had a bit of time to think about the productivity question. Who wants to go on this? I like that look of faces about. Oh God, go on, Stuart.
What a great question. And you're right, it is a real challenge, isn't it? You just look at the stats. I think in the various places I've worked, things that always help with productivity is focus and motivation. But do I think focus and motivation are represented down right from Treasury in terms of how money is allocated in the system design? I'm not sure. So I'd try and aim for focus and motivation through all of our policies.
Okay, anyone want to add to that in a few more words?
I actually think the science and technology framework is, if we properly embed that across government, is potentially transformational from a productivity point of view. Both of us are pointing at kind of systems levels interventions, and actually, I quite the notion that there is one thing you can do is part of the problem, I would say.
I don't think venture capital is the answer, because like one in 1,000 companies are backed by venture capital, right? So it's about what are the mechanisms to make all of those other companies adopt innovation, and maybe that's getting the banks properly financing small businesses again, for example.
Interventions, multiple levers pulled together.
Brilliant.
Things.
Thank you.
Multiple levels. I think yesterday it came out, there's 9 million people economically inactive in the UK at the moment, and that is a huge number, and we are desperately going down the ranks. So I think it's a system level. So I would go infrastructure. We've got to get our connectivity sorted out. The trains.
Okay,
and making
I'm
sure
going to
that's
stop.
key.
Please don't start on trains.
Yeah, don't start on trains and skills.
I don't want an Avanti question.
And reskill.
They're both in the framework.
Right. So we've got this systems thinking, and I think that's a really good point on which to finish. I'm supposed to sum up now, but I'm conscious of time. I think we've had an excellent panel, some really insightful things. I will just say one thing before inviting Andy up to sort of close this session. Please fill in this card on the table. I've been told it's very important. I'm sure it is, but actually it is really important because it tells the people, it tells UKRI particularly about what was good, what you'd like to see more of. All those questions you didn't dare ask, even though I gave you plenty of chances, you can put on this card. So can I invite Andy, Vice-Chancellor, Lancaster University, to just concluding remarks. Thank you. Over to you, Andy.
Thank you very much. Impossible to sum up the richness of conversation that has taken place, not just in this session, but in the day before as well, and last night. Let me just then say a number of very quick things instead of summing up. And the main one is thank you. Dame Ottoline, you brought a stellar cast of colleagues to the Northwest. Thank you very much indeed for doing so. Thank you for your time and your colleagues' time in coming and listening and engaging in today in presenting your strategy and being prepared to answer a range of questions. It's really appreciated, and hurry back. A second thanks is to you in the room and to you online, because this conversation would be very one way without you. And I know that the questions have contained both a richness, but also a depth of possibility. And I think the really exciting thing about the Northwest is that possibility and that shared vision of how do we create prosperity for this country, for this region. How do we make life just that little bit better for everybody? And I think that shared vision that came out of the strategy document that you talked about, but also the real passion that you saw in the room, whether it's academic colleagues, whether it's business, whether it's people working in local government and beyond, or the third sector, desperately trying to draw out all of that potential that sits in this part of the country. So thank you for playing your part in making the dialogue really rich. So those are the two things I wanted to say. And above all, yes, hurry back. This is the formal end of the event, but not the actual end, because there is lunch served. And there is also that really important opportunity for you all to network with each other and ask those questions that you didn't quite get time to ask. So with that, thank you very much indeed.